In this lecture, we're going to finish off our top level menu items, and we're going to look at a couple of techniques we can use in VS Code to make editing multiple items a lot easier than editing each item manually. So first of all, let's head on back to our code, and in our index.html, let's go ahead and add our missing menu items. So the remaining menu items are the lineup, tickets, and support. So let's go ahead and add those in then. First of all, I'm going to wrap the home label in a span tag. So what we can do here then is we can just copy the first menu item and paste it for our remaining menu items. So we'll have home, lineup, tickets, and support. So we can go home, lineup, tickets, and support. So let's save this and take a look in the browser now and give it a refresh. And there we go, we've got our main menu items here. So what happens then if we go back to our code, we've got all these class names, we're duplicating all this extra code. What happens then if we want to update all of our menu items and apply the same update to all of our menu items? So for example, let's say we wanted to increase or decrease the padding for each of our menu items. So instead of going to each single padding class here and updating it to, let's say, P2 instead of P4, and then going down each of our menu items and updating it manually, what we can do is use a shortcut in VS Code, which will allow us to add multiple cursors and edit in multiple places at the same time. So on Mac, we can hold down the Option key on the keyboard and just click wherever we want our additional cursor. And on Windows, we need to hold down the Alt key and click where we want to add our additional cursor. So I've clicked just before this 2 here in exactly the same position as the first one I had selected with the cursor. So I'm going to go ahead and select all the relevant menu items there. And we can see now the cursor is blinking in 4 different places for each of our menu items. So now we can use all of our keyboard keys and it will update in all of those cursor positions. So if I wanted to update the padding then for each of these, I could update it to 4. I could update it to any value. It doesn't really matter. I could delete font bold, for example, if I wanted to. And all of those changes are going to happen in all of those instances where I've got my cursors. So I'm going to add the font bold back in, and you can just click anywhere within the file window to deselect all of those multiple cursors. So now we're just back to just one cursor. So another shortcut, which is very similar, and that's a way to add multiple cursors, is if we had, for example, a div here, and let's for the moment pretend we don't have any of these menu items. And let's say we wanted to add our menu items here. So I'm just copying and pasting all these divs. And again, instead of holding down Option and clicking for the multiple cursors, what I can do here is I can point where I want my first cursor to be, and I can hold down Option and Command and use the arrow key. So I'm using the down arrow key here to select all in line, and then I could add some class names, and this will be where we add all of our class names for our menu items. So if you're on Windows, the exact same command, if you want to add multiple cursors via clicking, is holding down Alt. And then when you hold down Alt, then you want to click in the particular position you want your new cursor to be. And exactly the same for the technique. Instead of clicking where on Mac we hold down Option and Command and use the down arrow key or the up arrow key to select a particular position, on Windows we can use Control Alt and down or up. So we can hold down Control Alt and hit the down key and it does exactly the same thing. So one thing I'll note as well is, let's remove all these example divs here. One thing I'll note as well is, if we're using a front-end framework like Vue or React, then we'd usually refactor this out into a separate component. So we'd never really be duplicating all of these class names and adding all of these menu items in line, because we'd just create one single menu item component and then we'd just render it. So for example, we'd have a menu item component, and within this menu item component, all of these classes will just be referenced once within that menu item component. And then we'd render that menu item component multiple times. And then maybe we'd have a prop that we pass into it, something like label. And then the first one would be home, and the second one would be lineup, etc., etc. So in frameworks like Vue and React, it's very rare that we'd be duplicating all of these class names for things like menu items and all of our common components, because we just contain it in one place. It would just be housed in one place and specified in one place, and that is within the component itself. However, if you're not using something like Vue or React, where you have components where you can specify just once all of these class names, so maybe you're building out a WordPress theme or maybe a Shopify theme or something like that, or you're building out something that doesn't support this component type architecture, and you have no choice but to display all your things like menu items all in one line like this and not refactor it out into a component, then this is a good candidate to use components from Tailwind. So in my opinion, components from Tailwind are more of a kind of last resort to use. You should always, if you're using Vue and React and front-end frameworks like that, you should always move these types of common markup into a component. However, if you can't do that, then the sort of last resort is a Tailwind component. So to create a Tailwind component is super easy. What we can do is in input.css, exactly like what we've done with the layer directive here, targeting the base layer, we can do exactly the same and target the components layer. So it's within this components where we can create some component classes. So an appropriate name for the component we want to create now is a menu item. So instead of repeating all of these class names here, we can go ahead and specify just once in one place all of these class names and apply it to all of our menu items. So let's go ahead then and create a menu item class. So for this, we want to write some CSS. So we just want to go menu-item here, and we want to apply all of the relevant Tailwind CSS classes to this menu item. So for example, we want to apply all of these classes that we've already specified within our markup, and we want to apply all of these classes to a single class called menu item. So let's go ahead and select all those class names there. Let's go ahead and copy those class names. And in input.css then, for the menu item, we can go ahead and use the apply directive that comes out of the box from Tailwind, followed by all of the class names we want to apply to this particular menu item component class. So let's go ahead and paste all of those Tailwind CSS class names for our menu item. Let's go ahead and save this now. And let's go ahead and refactor our index.html. And instead of specifying all those class names, let's go ahead and combine what we've just learned now by selecting multiple cursors or creating multiple cursors. So I'm going to hold down Option on my Mac. If you're using Windows, you want to hold down Alt, and we're going to click at the start of each of these class names here. Then I'm just going to go ahead and delete all of these class names. And then I just want to apply a single class called menu-item. So if we save this now, and now we take a look in the browser, let's go ahead and give it a refresh, and nothing should have actually changed because it's exactly the same classes being applied within this menu item class in input.css. It's all these same classes that we're applying. However, we're just adding them to a single class name now called menu item. Now, one downside to this is it's going to increase our output CSS. So whereas before we're using in multiple places all of these class names, we're now adding another class name to add to our output CSS called menu item. So using components in this way will increase your bundle size and potentially increase it by quite a bit. That's why it's always recommended, if you're using things like Vue or React, it's always recommended to just use the utility classes within Tailwind CSS, and you don't need to create these component classes if you're using a front-end framework like Vue and React. However, if you're not using a component-based framework, then you can go ahead and use these components in Tailwind CSS. You can create these components in Tailwind CSS. However, I do recommend that you use these as a last resort. If you can get away without using components, I highly recommend that you don't use them because they do and can contribute to larger output CSS files. So with that said, now that we've covered a bunch of different editing techniques within VS Code, now that we've covered components in Tailwind CSS, we can go ahead and continue and finish off our navbar. If we take a look in the completed project, we just need one thing now to finish off this navbar for the desktop view, and that is the submenu item. So in the next lecture, we'll take a look at these submenu items, and then we'll go ahead and start looking at our mobile navbar, where we've got this burger menu icon here with this nice little transition between open and close, as well as opening up the mobile menu and the mobile submenu. However, we're going to start in the next lecture taking a look at the desktop submenu.